Jackson Core was the kind of person who preferred the hum of machinery over the noise of the world. He worked as a mechanic on a salvage ship that roamed the vast stretches of space, collecting the wreckage of old starships and turning them into something useful. His clothes were always stained with oil, and his hands were constantly covered in grease. His ship, the Endurance, was a battered hunk of metal that barely held together, but it was home. There was something about the quiet solitude of space that he loved. He had no family, no friends, just the endless stars above him and the constant task of fixing broken ships. Jackson had never been the type to attract attention. He wasn't a fighter or a hero, just a man who could repair anything with a wrench and some spare parts. His crew, a small group of misfits, respected him for his skills, but never asked about his past. They didn't need to know. They had their own secrets. One day, as Jackson worked on a derelict warship he had found drifting in an abandoned sector, he stumbled upon something strange. Hidden deep within the ship's wreckage, buried beneath layers of dust and debris, was an old, sealed box. His curiosity piqued. Jackson carefully pried it open. Inside was a weapon, an ancient, intricately designed piece of technology that seemed far more advanced than anything Jackson had ever seen. It was heavy in his hands, and as soon as he touched it, the weapon hummed to life, as if it recognized him. A strange sensation washed over him, like a wave of energy flowing through his body. He couldn't explain it, but there was something about the weapon that made him feel different. He placed it aside, thinking that he could sell it for a small fortune. But when he tried to leave the ship, things went wrong. A ship appeared out of nowhere, its black hull gleaming in the dark void of space. It was massive, its shape sleek and menacing. It was the Kraxan Empire, a ruthless military power known for their brutal ways. Jackson barely had time to react as his ship was pulled into the enemy vessel's tractor beam. He was caught. The crew, scrambling to escape, managed to send out a distress signal before Jackson was dragged aboard the enemy ship. He had no idea why they were after him or the weapon, but he knew one thing. He wasn't going to go down without a fight. The Kraxans were feared across the galaxy, but Jackson was a mechanic, not a soldier. The thought of facing them in combat was enough to make his stomach turn. But then again, he had no choice. His options were limited, and his fate seemed sealed. Before he could figure out what to do next, his ship was torn apart. The Kraxans had boarded and were taking everything they could. Jackson was forced to leave the wreckage of his ship and run. He had no real plan, only the instinct to survive. The Kraxan soldiers were everywhere, but Jackson's mind was sharp, and he was fast. He darted through the corridors of the enemy ship, finding every nook and cranny to hide in. But luck ran out fast. As he turned a corner, he ran right into a woman. She was tall and powerful-looking, with cold, piercing eyes that seemed to read right through him. She wasn't a soldier, not like the others. She wore a uniform adorned with symbols of high rank, and her presence demanded respect. Without saying a word, she grabbed Jackson by the arm and pulled him toward her. Jackson's heart raced. Was she going to kill him? Was he going to die in the hands of this woman, this stranger, with no one even knowing who he was? But then, something strange happened. As soon as their eyes locked, Jackson felt a shock, like an electric pulse shooting through his entire body. The woman froze, her expression changing. She stared at him in disbelief, her lips slightly parted as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. "You?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "You?" "What are you talking about?" he asked, trying to pull away from her grip. But her hand tightened, and she took a step back, still staring at him like she had just seen a ghost. "I don't have time for games," Jackson said, struggling. He tried to push past her, but she wouldn't let him go. "You are the savior," she said, her words almost a whisper now. Jackson felt a strange sense of unease settle in his chest. What did she mean by savior? He wasn't a hero. He was just a mechanic, a simple man who fixed things. There was no way he could be the person she was looking for. But before he could protest, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway. The Kraxan soldiers were closing in. The woman grabbed Jackson's arm again, her grip stronger now, and pulled him down a side corridor. "We don't have much time," she said urgently. "You must come with me!" Jackson didn't know what to think. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of everything. Who was this woman? Why was she calling him the savior? And what did any of this have to do with the weapon he had found? He had no answers, but one thing was clear. The game had just changed, and whether he liked it or not, he was now part of something far bigger than himself. Jackson couldn't believe what was happening. His head was spinning, and his heart raced as the woman continued to drag him down the narrow corridor. The Kraxan soldiers were still searching the ship, their heavy boots echoing through the hallways. Jackson glanced over his shoulder, but the woman didn't stop. She pulled him faster, deeper into the unknown parts of the ship. Every turn they made seemed to take them further from the chaos they had just escaped. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached a small, dimly lit room. The woman shoved the door open and pushed him inside. She followed, locking the door behind them. The room was empty, save for a few crates and some old equipment piled in the corners. It smelled of metal and old technology. Jackson turned to face her, his eyes still filled with confusion. "Who are you?" he demanded, trying to catch his breath. "What do you mean I'm the savior?" The woman looked at him with a strange intensity. Her cold, sharp eyes softened for a moment, but she didn't answer immediately. Instead, she seemed to be weighing her next words carefully. "I'm Alira," she said after a long pause. "And you?" "You're the one we've been waiting for?" Jackson frowned. "What do you mean? I'm just a mechanic." "I found this weapon, and now you're calling me a savior? You've got the wrong person." Alira's face remained serious, and she stepped closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear.
"It's not about the weapon, Jackson.
"It's about you. The weapon, it only responds to you. You've been chosen, whether you like it or not." Jackson didn't know what to say. This was insane. He had just stumbled onto a ship full of deadly enemies, and now he was being told that he was some kind of hero. It didn't make sense. He didn't ask for any of this. "Chosen for what?" he asked, his voice rising slightly. He tried to control his frustration, but it was hard. He had spent his whole life fixing machines, not saving galaxies. Alira didn't seem offended by his anger. Instead, she stood silently for a moment, as if deciding whether or not to tell him the truth. Finally, she spoke again, her voice low but filled with an undeniable sense of urgency. "The Marians, my people, are in danger." "The Kraxans are planning to destroy us. They want to take our homeworld, and they've been hunting for the weapon that could stop them." "But the weapon won't work unless it's in the hands of the right person. You, Jackson, are that person." Jackson shook his head. "I'm just a mechanic." "There's no way I'm the one you need. You've got soldiers, warriors, people trained for this kind of thing." "I'm not one of them." Alira stepped closer, her eyes filled with determination.
"You don't understand. The weapon isn't just any tool.
It's part of an ancient prophecy. It was built by our ancestors for a time like this. A time when we would be threatened by a force far stronger than we could fight on our own. The prophecy says that when the weapon is found, the savior will rise from the least expected place. The person who holds the weapon must be someone who doesn't seek power, someone who is humble and unnoticed. Jackson's mind raced. He didn't know what to believe. It sounded like some kind of fairy tale. He had no royal blood, no special training, no experience with war. All he knew was how to fix things. But Alira wasn't finished. I know, this is hard to accept. But, Jackson, the galaxy is counting on you. You're the one who can stop the Craxons. The weapon is only a key. It can unlock the power to save us. But it needs someone like you to wield it. It needs someone with a heart that doesn't crave glory. Someone who can see the bigger picture. Jackson clenched his fists, his frustration growing. I'm not a hero. I don't even know how to fight. What am I supposed to do? Alira took a deep breath, seeming to gather her thoughts. You don't have to fight alone. I'll help you. The Myrians will help you. Together, we can defeat the Craxons. Jackson's mind was reeling. His thoughts raced from one question to the next, but he couldn't seem to hold on to any of them for long. The only thing he knew for sure was that he had been thrown into something he didn't understand, and it terrified him.
You keep saying we can defeat the Craxons, he said, his voice quieter now.
But how? They're everywhere. They've taken over half the galaxy already. What's to stop them from crushing us all? Alira met his gaze, her eyes fierce. We fight back. We use the weapon. We have no other choice. The Craxons are already on their way to the Myrian homeworld. The attack will come within days. We have to move fast. I can get you to the Royal Fleet, where we can prepare. But we need to act now. Jackson still didn't know what to think. But he knew one thing. The Craxons were closing in. And if he didn't do something, everything he had ever known would be lost. What do you need me to do? He asked, his voice firm. He wasn't sure if he was ready, but there was no turning back now. Alira smiled slightly, her eyes shining with something like hope. We take the fight to them. Together, Jackson sat in the darkened corner of the Myrian shuttle, his hands gripping the edge of his seat. He had never felt so out of place in his life. The walls around him hummed with the sound of the ship's engines, and the soft glow of control panels flickered in the dim light. Alira sat across from him, her expression serious as she stared at the star map in front of her. They were heading toward the Royal Fleet, the last hope of the Myrian resistance. Jackson had never imagined his life would end up like this. He had always been just a mechanic, someone who fixed broken ships for a living. But now, here he was, caught in the middle of a war that he didn't understand, with the fate of an entire species resting on his shoulders. Are you sure about this? Jackson asked, breaking the silence. His voice was low, unsure. I'm not a warrior. I don't even know how to use the weapon. I don't know if I can do what you're asking. Alira didn't look up from the map. You don't need to know everything right now. We have a plan. You just have to trust yourself, and trust that you're more capable than you think. Jackson frowned. He didn't feel capable. He wasn't a soldier, and he wasn't some chosen hero. He was just a man who had found an ancient weapon by accident. But Alira's words kept echoing in his mind. Maybe there was something more to him than he realized. The ship's engines hummed louder as they neared the Myrian fleet. Jackson's stomach tightened. He had no idea what awaited them, but he knew it wasn't going to be easy. The Craxons were powerful, ruthless, and they wouldn't stop until they had wiped out every Myrian in the galaxy. We are almost there, Alira said, her voice steady, despite the tension in the air. Once we reach the fleet, we'll be safe for now. But the real battle is still ahead of us. We need to prepare. Jackson nodded, but his thoughts were clouded with doubt. What could he do against such a force? The weapon in his hand had immense power, but it felt foreign to him. He didn't understand it. And yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that somehow he was the only one who could use it. As the shuttle docked with the Myrian flagship, Jackson felt his heart race. The massive ship loomed in front of them, its sleek design unlike anything he had ever seen. It was a symbol of the Myrian strength, their last line of defense. But even this mighty vessel was no match for the Kraxon war machine. The Mirians had already lost so much. "Stay close," Alira said, her voice low. She stood and motioned for Jackson to follow her. They walked down a long corridor, passing soldiers and officers who saluted Alira as she passed. She was a queen, a leader of her people, and the respect she commanded was clear. Jackson couldn't help but feel a little out of place. He wasn't royalty. He wasn't even close. But as they walked together, something inside him began to change. He could feel it. Deep down, he wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He was part of something bigger, something important. They reached a large chamber at the heart of the ship. It was filled with Mirian leaders, all gathered around a table discussing strategy. When Alira entered, the room fell silent. All eyes turned to her. "Queen Alira," one of the commanders said, bowing his head in respect. "We've been waiting for you." Alira nodded. "This is Jackson Core," she said, motioning to him. "He's the one who found the weapon. He's the key to our survival." The commanders exchanged uneasy glances. Jackson felt their eyes on him, their doubts clear. They had been preparing for war for so long, and now they were being told that a mechanic was their savior. It didn't make sense to them, and it didn't make sense to Jackson either, but Alira stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "The weapon has chosen him. We have no other choice. He will fight with us." One of the commanders, a tall Mirian with silver hair, stepped forward. "Your Majesty, we've heard rumors of the weapon's power, but we don't know if it's enough. We've seen the Kraxon's strength. What makes you think this man can turn the tide?"
Alira's gaze hardened. "Because the weapon only responds to him, and I trust him."
Jackson felt a weight settle on his shoulders. He had never wanted this responsibility, but now it was his. The eyes of the Mirian commanders were all on him, waiting for him to prove himself. "We have no time to waste," Alira continued. "The Kraxons are on their way. We prepare for the final battle." "Jackson, you need to train. You need to learn how to use the weapon." Jackson nodded slowly, still uncertain but ready to try. He wasn't a hero, not yet. But if he had to be one, he would give it everything he had. He had no choice. In the following days, Jackson was put through rigorous training. Alira and the Mirian soldiers worked with him, teaching him how to wield the weapon. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. It felt alive in his hands, pulsating with energy, as though it were connected to him on a deeper level. But still, doubts lingered in his mind. Could he really use it to save them? Could he really stop the Kraxons? As the final battle loomed ever closer, Jackson knew the truth. This wasn't just about the weapon, it was about him. He had to believe in himself, in his own strength, even if he didn't feel ready. The fate of the Mirians depended on it. The day of the battle arrived faster than Jackson had expected. The Mirian fleet was ready, the warriors prepared for the fight that would decide the fate of their people. Jackson stood on the bridge of the flagship, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The weapon was by his side, its strange energy still humming quietly. He had trained with it for days, but the more he learned, the more he realized how little he understood. Alira stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the star map in front of them. The Kraxon fleet was closing in, their ship spreading across the sky like a shadow. The Mirians were outnumbered, but they weren't going down without a fight. Jackson couldn't help but feel the pressure building in his chest. This was it. The moment he had been told would come. "Are you ready?" Alira asked, her voice calm but filled with determination. Jackson glanced at her, his mind racing. He wasn't sure if he was ready, but there was no turning back now. "I don't know if I can do this," he said quietly. "But I have to try." Alira placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've already done more than anyone could ask."
Now you just have to believe in yourself.
Jackson nodded, trying to push his fear aside. He wasn't a warrior. He wasn't a soldier. But he was the only one who could wield the weapon, and that thought kept him going. The fate of the Merians depended on him, and if he failed, they would all fall. The first Kraxon ships appeared on the edge of the Merian system, their dark shapes looming in the distance. The Merian fleet, though smaller, was prepared to fight with everything they had. The battle would be fierce. Jackson could feel the tension rising as the ships moved into position, ready to engage. "This is it," Alira said, her voice filled with calm authority. "Let's make sure we're not the last ones standing." Jackson followed her out of the bridge, his heart pounding in his chest. The crew was already moving into position, preparing their weapons and readying the ship for combat. Jackson wasn't sure what role he would play in the fight, but he knew the time had come to use the weapon. It was no longer just a relic. It was the key to the future. As the Merian fleet engaged the Kraxon ships, the battle began with a roar. Lasers streaked through the darkness of space, exploding on impact with the Kraxon warships. The sound of the weapons was deafening, and the ship shook under the force of the blasts. Jackson gripped the weapon tightly, his fingers instinctively adjusting to its strange shape. The weapon hummed in his hands, its energy growing stronger with each passing moment. He could feel its power, the way it seemed to respond to his thoughts. It was as though the weapon knew what he needed and was guiding him. He had no idea how it worked, but he trusted it now. He had no choice. Alira's voice came through the comms, clear and strong. "Jackson, it's time. We need you to activate the weapon. Focus on the Kraxon flagship." Jackson took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing mind. The Kraxon flagship was the heart of their fleet, the strongest ship in their arsenal. If they could destroy it, they could break the Kraxon's hold on the galaxy. Jackson could see it through the viewport, massive and menacing, firing at the Merian ships with deadly precision. With a deep breath, Jackson closed his eyes and focused. He thought of the lives at stake, the Merians, Alira, and everyone who had placed their trust in him. His fingers tightened around the weapon. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew this was the moment. Suddenly, the weapon pulsed in his hands, and a wave of energy shot out, a brilliant beam of light that tore through the darkness of space. It streaked toward the Kraxon flagship, striking it directly. The ship shook as if it were alive, its outer hull cracking under the intense power of the blast. The Kraxons hadn't expected anything like this. Their ship was the most advanced in their fleet, but it was no match for the weapon in Jackson's hands. Jackson watched in awe as the Kraxon flagship began to break apart. The weapon's power surged through him, the light from the blast reflecting in his eyes. It was a moment of pure destruction, but it wasn't just the weapon's power. It was Jackson's belief in himself, in the strength of his people, and in the promise he had made to fight for them. Alira's voice crackled over the comms again. "Well done, Jackson. You did it! The Kraxon flagship is down! But the fight isn't over. Keep going!" Jackson nodded, still stunned by what had just happened. The Kraxon fleet was in disarray, their flagship gone, but they weren't going to surrender without a fight. The battle was far from over, and Jackson knew that the weapon wasn't enough to win this alone. The Merians still had to fight, still had to push back the enemy. He gripped the weapon tighter, ready to fight with everything he had. His doubts were gone now. He wasn't just a mechanic. He wasn't just a man who had stumbled into this fight. He was the one who could lead them to victory. And for the first time, Jackson felt like a hero. The battle raged on, but with the Kraxon flagship destroyed, the Merians had a chance. They were not alone anymore. Jackson had given them hope, and together they would fight until the very end.